Sometimes the loudest cries come from the hearts that stay silent. In the narrow lanes of a forgotten town, under the rusted roofs and cracked windows, lived a boy named Aarav, a boy who learned pain before he ever knew peace. Aarav wasn't born into tragedy. He was born into laughter, warmth, and lullabies sung by a mother whose voice could tame storms. But life doesn't send warnings. One day, the sun didn't rise for Aarav, it simply vanished behind clouds that never cleared again. He was 8 when the fire took everything. It started with a flickering flame from a short-circuited wire in the kitchen. A scream. The shattering of glass. The desperate pounding of fists against locked wooden doors. And then, silence. The kind of silence that blankets the world when everything you know has been swallowed whole. The house collapsed before the fire brigade arrived. Neighbors watched in helpless horror. His mother's charred bangles were found by the doorstep. His father's watch had stopped ticking at 3:14 a.m. And Aarav was pulled out from under a table, barely breathing. He survived, but something inside him didn't. In the following weeks, the village pitied him. They offered stale food, half-hearted hugs, and sentences like, "He's strong, he'll move on." But grief doesn't move on. It lodges itself in your chest like a shard of glass you're too scared to remove. Aarav didn't speak for days. When he finally did, his voice was no longer a child's, it was cracked, cautious, and brittle. Relatives argued over who would take him in like he was a burden, not a boy. Finally, he was sent to live with an uncle in the city, a man with a stone heart and a clockwork life. No smiles. No stories. Just rules. You eat at 7. You sleep at 9. You stay out of my way. Aarav, once a curious boy who asked about stars and drew dragons in his notebooks, now counted cracks in the ceiling and flinched at the sound of matches being lit. He wasn't allowed to keep his mother's bangles. His drawings were thrown away. The one photo he had, charred at the edges, was hidden inside the lining of his school bag. School was no better. Uniforms too big, shoes too tight, and classmates who whispered behind his back. Orphan. Burn boy. The cursed one. Aarav learned to shrink himself. He learned that silence was safer than speaking, and invisibility was better than attention. He spoke only when spoken to, laughed only in his dreams, and he cried, quietly into his pillow, where no one would hear. But even in darkness, tiny sparks exist. At school, there was one teacher, Ms. Isha, who saw him. Not just the student, not just the trauma, but him. She didn't try to fix him. She didn't pity him. She simply noticed. When he drew, she left his sketches on the board for others to see. When he sat alone, she walked by and offered books about faraway worlds and brave children who tamed monsters. Still, Aarav stayed guarded. The world had already broken him once. Why would he trust it again? But something within him stirred. One rainy afternoon, while walking home, he passed by a broken window and saw his reflection, wet, tired, small. He stared into his own eyes and whispered something he hadn't said in years. "Is this all I'll ever be?" The wind didn't answer. The rain didn't stop. But in that moment, a decision was born, not loud, not grand, but quiet and determined. He would not let pain be the end of his story. Aarav didn't know how. He didn't know when. But he decided right there that he would fight. Not with fists, not with anger, but with whatever light remained in him. This was his beginning, not the fire. Not the loss. But this choice. To rise. They say every soul carries a story, but not all are told with words. Some are etched in silence, in stares that last too long, in hands that tremble for no reason. And for Aarav, his story had become a quiet war, fought beneath school desks, behind bathroom doors, under the cold sheets of a stranger's house he was forced to call home. Aarav didn't know when the nightmares started. Maybe they had always been there, waiting to rise through the cracks of his memory. Fire. Smoke. Screams. The feeling of breathlessness. He would jolt awake at night, gasping, clawing at the pillow as if still trapped under fallen beams. His uncle never asked. Just banged on the door and told him to grow up. But pain doesn't age. It lingers. Still, Aarav went to school. Every day. Because in that building of chalk dust and broken fans, something pulled him forward. A reason that didn't yet have a name. It wasn't the other students, most of whom still kept their distance, unsure of what to say to the quiet boy who flinched when doors slammed. It was art. His first sketch wasn't planned. It happened on the back of a math notebook. A dragon, rising from flames, scarred but not destroyed. When he looked at it, he didn't see a beast. He saw himself. Terrified. Dangerous. Lonely. But alive. From then on, the pages filled quickly. His books became galleries. Creatures from nightmares. Places he'd never been. Faces he could never forget. His mother's smile, half-burned. His father's eyes. The moment before it all ended, frozen forever in ink. He drew during lunch breaks, on the bus, sometimes in the middle of class when the teacher wasn't looking. But Ms. Isha noticed. She didn't scold him. She asked questions. What is this one feeling? Why do you think the wings are torn? Does this one have a name? At first, he didn't answer. Just shrugged. But one day he whispered, that one's called after. After what? She asked. A pause. His eyes fixed on the page. After everything. She nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. That day, she left a sketchbook on his desk. Not school-issued. Not cheap. Thick, white pages. A charcoal pencil tucked into the spiral binding. A note on the first page. For the stories you're not ready to tell. He didn't cry. But his fingers trembled when he touched the paper. At home, the sketchbook became his refuge. Every line he drew was a breath taken. Every shadow he shaded was a memory faced. He didn't need therapy. He had graphite. And fire? Fire couldn't touch these pages. But not all flames come from wires or stoves. Some come from people. It was a Thursday when his uncle found the sketchbook. You wasting your time with this crap? He flipped through it with disgust, pausing on a drawing of their home, twisted and cold, a broken boy standing in the corner. This isn't art. This is obsession. You want to end up mad like your father? Aarav didn't respond. He couldn't. He just stared as the man walked to the balcony, sketchbook in hand. No. Aarav shouted his first shout in months. But it was too late. One tear. One flick. And the pages curled into flame. He watched his entire world burn. Again. No rescue this time. No neighbors. Just ash floating like snow. He didn't eat for 2 days. Didn't sleep for 3? Ms. Isha noticed. She asked. He shook his head. She didn't press. But during art period, she gave him another sketchbook. Same kind. Same note. This time she added a line, you can lose paper. But never your voice. That night, Aarav stared at the blank pages for hours. What's the point? He thought. But grief is stubborn. And art is rebellion. He picked up the pencil. His hand shook. But he began. This time he drew the fire, but it didn't win. He drew his uncle, faceless, small, standing before a storm. He drew his home, rebuilt in steel and light. He drew himself not as a child but a boy holding a sword made of words. He drew his mother's bangles around a sun. He drew and drew and drew until dawn. Art was no longer just escape. It became resistance. At school, he started staying behind. Helping clean up after class. Helping Ms. Isha sort supplies. One day he asked her, "Why do you help me?" She smiled. "Because someone helped me once. And I never forgot. Were you broken too?" She nodded. "Still am. But broken things let more light in." Aarav didn't reply. But that night, he drew a cracked vase filled with stars. Weeks passed. The sketchbook grew heavy. He started getting noticed. Not by many, but enough. A boy in class asked if he could draw him as a superhero. A girl said, "Your dragons are cooler than marvels." Even the principal stopped to say, "You have a gift." He didn't smile. Not fully. But inside something stirred. A flicker. A spark. Maybe he wasn't cursed. Maybe he wasn't broken. Maybe, just maybe, he was becoming. Not the same boy who watched his world collapse. Not the silent ghost in the back row. But someone else. Someone who had been to hell and returned with fire in his hands. Not to destroy, but to create. This was not healing. It was becoming. And Aarav was just getting started. The world, they say, doesn't wait for healing. It keeps spinning. The sun keeps rising. The crowds keep moving. And if you fall behind, no one looks back. Aarav learned this the hard way. After months of sketchbooks and subtle smiles, something began to shift inside him. It wasn't loud or sudden, but gradual. Like the way light creeps through a closed curtain, reminding you morning has arrived whether you're ready or not. He started raising his hand in class. Not always, but enough to be noticed. He even answered questions in literature. Stories began to intrigue him, especially the broken heroes. The flawed ones. The ones who wore their scars like armor. He understood them. Maybe, in some unspoken way, he was one of them. But outside the school gates, life still wore a mask. And Aarav had to wear one too. His uncle remained unchanged. Cold. Mechanical. A man who believed emotion was weakness and expression was rebellion. Aarav had stopped trying to connect. He just followed the routine, eat in silence, clean without being asked, never mention art. And then came the festival. Diwali. The city lit in gold, families laughing, houses echoing with joy, lights everywhere, except in Aarav's home. His uncle hated festivals, called them distractions. The house remained dark, the only flicker coming from the neighbor's balcony. Aarav stood by the window, watching sparklers write poems in the sky. Laughter rang in the air. It didn't hurt like it used to. It didn't sting. But it reminded him he was outside joy, always a bystander. Still, something tugged at him. The thought, a dare. He slipped out. Not far. Just to the corner, where kids danced around diyas, and the sweet vendor handed out free jalebis. No one noticed him, but for a moment he felt included. Invisible but not excluded. That mattered. That night he drew again. This time, a boy with a lantern inside his chest, wandering through a crowd of faceless people. His teacher saw it the next day. "What's his name?" she asked. Aarav shrugged. "No name. He's just pretending to be okay." She looked at him for a long moment and said quietly, "Aren't we all?" That stuck with him. The idea that everyone wears a mask. That even smiles might be disguises. Maybe even Ms. Isha had her own sketchbook somewhere, filled with her own dragons. Soon after, a notice went up on the board, Annual Inter-School Art Competition, theme, Behind the Mask. Something clicked in Aarav's chest. Like fate had dropped a whisper in his ear. He took the form. Signed his name. No hesitation. But confidence is a fragile thing. The moment his classmates saw his name on the list, the murmurs began. Him. The orphan boy? Bet it'll be all dark and creepy again. One even laughed, maybe he'll draw another fire. Aarav didn't respond. He just walked away. But inside, the doubt roared. It clawed at him, whispering, "They're right. What are you even doing?" He almost quit. Almost. But at night, in the quiet of his room, he took out his charcoal pencil and began. The drawing took days. It wasn't neat. It wasn't pretty. But it was truth. A boy with a stitched smile. Eyes that leaked ink. A mask held in one hand while the other hid behind his back, holding a burning heart. He called it, "I am not what I show." Ms. Isha saw it before submission day. She didn't speak for a long time. Just stared. Then she whispered, "This will hurt them." In a good way. He didn't understand. Not yet. At the competition, Aarav sat alone. Hundreds of students, dressed in their school best, laughed, posed for pictures, adjusted canvases. Aarav had no fanfare. No parents cheering. No camera to capture the moment. Just him. And his truth. When his painting was revealed, the room fell silent. Not because it was flawless, but because it was honest. People stared. Some confused. Some moved. Some uncomfortable. One judge asked, "What inspired this?" Aarav looked him in the eye and said, "The part of us no one claps for." He didn't win first prize. He won second. But that night, something far bigger happened. His drawing was featured in the school magazine. The title, "I Am Not What I Show," became a conversation. Students began writing poems about masks. One even confessed in the next assembly about dealing with depression. The walls cracked. The silence broke. And Aarav? He became more than the quiet boy. He became the one who showed them how to speak without words. Still, the world didn't change overnight. His uncle never mentioned the competition. At home, there were no congratulations. But in Aarav's heart, a new sound had begun. The sound of his own voice. Not loud, but clear. He began helping others with their drawings. He offered advice. Critiqued kindly. He began existing, not just surviving. And for the first time in years, he looked in the mirror and didn't look away. He even smiled. Not the kind you fake. The kind that says, "I'm still here. I'm still me. I'm still becoming." They say the strongest flames don't burn buildings. They burn within. And Aarav, he had lived with fire. Outside and in. But this fire was different. It no longer roared from broken wires or collapsing roofs. It lived in his chest now, steady, silent, and waiting. In the weeks after the competition, something had changed in Aarav. He could feel it. In his walk. In the way people looked at him. In the way he looked at himself. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was seen. Still quiet, yes. Still guarded. but no longer a ghost. Opportunities began appearing like stars after a storm. One day, Ms. Isha pulled him aside. "There's a city-level mentorship program," she said. "For young artists. Real artists." He blinked. "I'm not a." "You are," she interrupted, firm but kind. "I've already sent your work. They want to meet you." It felt surreal. Like hearing someone had mistaken you for someone important and liking the mistake. The mentorship was hosted by an art institute. White walls, tall glass windows filled with canvases that looked like dreams made solid. When Aarav entered for the first time, his breath caught. Paintings that made silence sing. Sculptures that spoke in stillness. And then, people. Other students. Loud, stylish, confident. Speaking in art terms he didn't understand. Negative space. Monochrome tension. Postmodernist angst. He wanted to shrink again. Fade. But he didn't. Instead, he found a quiet bench, opened his sketchbook, and began. By the end of the first session, a boy with blue-dyed hair leaned over. "You drew that from memory?" Aarav nodded. "Dude, that's sick. What school you from?" And just like that, a conversation. Week by week, Aarav came back. Every time a little taller. A little steadier. The mentors saw his raw skill, his instinct for emotion, for metaphor. He still didn't say much. But his drawings did the talking. Then came the big announcement. A chance to display a personal piece at a gallery. Not a competition. Not a school event. A real gallery. Every student would get one frame. One shot. The theme was origin. And that's when it began again. The fire. Memories came rushing uninvited. The smell of smoke. The heat against his cheek. His mother's bangles on the floor. His hands trying to lift the door. His father's silence. The trauma didn't knock this time. It kicked the door in. How do you create art from pain that still pulses in your veins? He tried. Sketch after sketch. Pages torn. Graphite smudged. Nothing felt right. Everything was either too raw or too fake. Until he remembered a conversation from weeks before. Ms. Isha had said the most powerful stories come from the scars we pretend aren't there. So Aarav stopped pretending. He closed the door. Sat by the window. Opened a fresh page. And let it bleed. He didn't just draw fire. He drew his house burning brick by brick. His mother reaching through flame. His father's watch frozen midair. A child's hand in the corner clutching a single photograph. But in the center, rising from the smoke, stood a boy. Not perfect. Not whole. But standing. Around him, pages of sketches floating like phoenix feathers. He called it Born from Ash. The gallery night arrived. He didn't tell his uncle. He didn't expect anyone. Just wore his school uniform, pressed neatly, and arrived early. The gallery was warm. Lit in amber. People murmured as they walked by. Some glanced. Some paused. Others stood and stared. A woman in a green sari had tears in her eyes. A man whispered, "Who made this?" Aarav stood by the corner, unsure whether to step forward or hide behind the nearest pillar. Then a hand touched his shoulder. "Ms. Isha, I'm so proud of you," she said. He looked up at her. "Is this okay? Too dark?" She shook her head. "No. This is light. Just from a different angle." And suddenly he saw it too. It wasn't fire that defined his story. It was what rose from it. He didn't win an award that night. But he won something else. An invitation. A famous local artist approached him. "Your work, it hurts. In the best way. I teach weekend workshops. You should come. Let's talk." Aarav nodded. Grateful. Speechless. But there was one thing left to do. He walked home late. Past midnight. The streets were quiet. Stars scattered like secrets. At the doorstep, his uncle waited. Aarav froze. He hadn't told him about the gallery. Hadn't planned to. But the man didn't yell. Didn't sneer. He just asked, "Where were you?" Aarav took a breath. "Somewhere I belonged." For the first time, his voice didn't shake. His uncle didn't respond. Just turned and walked in. But Aarav smiled. He didn't need approval. He had his fire now. Not the one that destroys, but the one that builds. They say time heals all wounds. But Aarav had learned something different. Time doesn't heal. It hides. It buries pain beneath routine. It covers screams with silence. It locks memory in a box and hopes you'll lose the key. But keys have a way of turning when you least expect them. It began with a letter. Old. Yellowed. Tucked inside a rusted tin box buried beneath his bed, the one thing he had kept from the fire but never dared to open. He found it on a Sunday morning. No reason. No plan. Just a sudden instinct, like a whisper in his spine. He lifted the lid, hands trembling. Inside, a photo of his family before the fire. A Rocky from his sister long gone to another city. And the letter. Handwritten. The curves soft and familiar. His mother's writing. Dear Aarav, it began. You are too young to understand why we live the way we do. Why your father walks with shadows behind his eyes. Why I smile even when I'm tired beyond words. As he read, the voice in his mind softened. But someday you'll know that pain doesn't make us weak. It makes us honest. She wrote of dreams. Of the books she used to read as a girl. Of how she would sing lullabies when no one was listening. How she hoped Aarav would grow into a kind boy with fire in his heart but light in his hands. He didn't cry. Not at first. But when he read the final line, the dam inside him broke. No matter what happens, you were born to bring color to the world. Never let anyone convince you your truth is too dark to be beautiful. The letter fell from his fingers. Tears came. Not soft this time, but storming. Shaking his chest. Years of silence breaking open. He had spent so long drawing fire, he had forgotten the warmth in her voice. The laughter in her eyes. The stories she told with her hands as she cooked. He missed her. Desperately. Fiercely. And with that grief came another truth. He didn't really know her. Not as a person. Only as a memory. That realization shook him. So he did something unexpected. He went searching. He asked Ms. Isha for help. She agreed without questions. Together, they visited his old neighborhood. The one he barely remembered yet still haunted his dreams. The houses had changed. Some rebuilt. Some erased. But the banyan tree still stood. Outside what used to be his home. He stood before it, unsure what to feel. That's when an old woman stepped outside a nearby doorway. She looked at him, squinted. You're Kavita's boy? Aarav nodded, hesitant. She smiled, teeth missing, eyes watery. She used to bring you to the temple every Friday. You always wanted to light the biggest diya. He smiled, just barely. The woman beckoned him in, made chai, offered old memories like offerings at a shrine. She was sunshine, the woman said. Even when your father lost his job, she never stopped smiling. She used to hum songs when she thought no one could hear. Aarav clutched the cup tightly. She continued. You know, she once said, my son will build worlds someday. He just doesn't know it yet. He blinked fast, tried not to let the tears fall. But the ache in his chest returned. Not painful this time, but sacred. Later, Ms. Isha drove him to the temple his mother had loved. There, he lit a diya. Alone. Hands steady. He whispered into the flame. I remember now. That night, he didn't draw pain. He drew her. Not her face. That was still fading. But her presence. He drew a woman with constellations in her palms. A smile that held storms. Eyes closed in peace, surrounded by music and falling leaves. He titled it, The First Light. It was the first time he drew without needing to explain. Without needing to hurt. At school, he showed it to Ms. Isha. She stared at it for a long time. Then she said, You're healing. He didn't reply. But inside, he felt something unlock. Later that week, the school announced a family exhibition. Students could submit art inspired by their roots. Aarav hesitated. He didn't have a family anymore. Not in the traditional sense. But maybe roots weren't always blood. Maybe they were letters. Lost songs. Old women and banyan trees. Maybe roots were what remained after the fire. He submitted the piece. It was displayed under a simple caption. For those who lit the path before me even when theirs was fading. People cried. Some parents stood silently. Others hugged their children. A father wiped his eyes and said, I never talk about my mother. This made me miss her. For Aarav, that was the prize. That his pain could awaken someone else's memory. That his silence could stir words in someone else's heart. That his fire could now warm, not burn. Back at home, his uncle saw the piece in a local newsletter. For the first time in years, the man didn't scoff. He placed it on the fridge crooked but intentionally. Aarav noticed. Said nothing. But that night, he slept without nightmares. Because the past no longer chased him. It walked beside him. Not as a wound, but as a whisper. Not as a weight, but as a witness. And he was finally ready to move forward. Some journeys take us far. But the hardest ones take us back. Back to where we first broke. Back to where we hid. Back to the silence we thought we had left behind. But sometimes, in going back, we build a bridge. Aarav had spent so long walking inward into his pain, his past, his pieces that he almost forgot the world outside. Until one day, it found him. It was a Sunday. The city was buzzing with preparations for Republic Day. Streets lined with paper flags. Loudspeakers repeating patriotic songs. Uniforms. Parades. Pride. But inside the small community center near the station, things were quieter. Simpler. It was Ms. Isha's idea. I volunteer there sometimes, she said. Underprivileged kids. They love stories. Maybe you could share one. Aarav hesitated. I'm not a teacher. You don't have to be, she replied. Just be you. So he went, not knowing what to expect. Sketchbook in hand. Backpack light, heart heavier. The center smelled of old books and sanitizer. Children of all ages sat on mismatched mats. Some barefoot. Some in slippers held together with safety pins. But all of them looking up with bright, untamed curiosity. A volunteer announced, today we have a guest. He's going to tell you a story without words. Confused giggles followed. Aarav walked to the front. Knees stiff. Palms clammy. He sat on the floor. Opened his sketchbook. Flipped to a blank page. Then he began to draw. One line. Then another. A house. A child. A flame. A door that wouldn't open. A hand reaching through darkness. A phoenix. A boy standing beneath it holding a broken crayon. The children watched in silence. When he finished, he looked up. A girl, maybe 7, raised her hand. Is that boy you? Aarav nodded. Another boy asked, did it hurt? Aarav paused. Then replied softly, yes. But it made me stronger. And with those 5 words, the room changed. The kids leaned in. Not toward his sketchbook. Toward him. For the next hour, they asked questions. Not just about art, but about fear, courage, loss. A boy whispered, my papa left last year. My mom cries at night. A girl said, I get scared when I hear loud noises. I don't know why. Aarav didn't have all the answers. But he listened. And that was enough. Before he left, one of the volunteers approached. They've never opened up like that before, she said. You gave them permission. Aarav blinked. Permission? To feel. To speak. To not be okay. It was the first time he realized. Art wasn't just a mirror. It was a bridge. A week later, he returned. This time, he brought papers, pencils, colors. Draw your heart, he said. Not what it looks like. What it feels like. And they did. Some drew thunderclouds. Some drew broken toys. One girl drew her mother's hands holding her while she cried. Aarav walked among them, encouraging, guiding, sitting beside them. He had become what he never had. A witness. By the 3rd visit, the kids had begun calling him Bia. Brother. Thick. Cream-colored. Sealed with gold ink. Inside, a letter. From the National Institute of Creative Expression, Delhi. A full scholarship. A 3-year residential program. World-class mentors. A gallery debut in his final year. It was everything. Everything he had once imagined when he was still a boy sketching fire and shadows in the margins of his notebooks. He reread the words 5 times. Then sat still for nearly an hour. Because beneath the joy was fear. He would have to leave. His home. His students. His Sunday sessions. Even Ms. Isha, who had become more than just a teacher, she was his compass. But the scariest part? He would no longer be a survivor telling his story. He would become a storyteller in the world. And that felt enormous. That night, he climbed to the roof. The city was alive with light. Kites. Traffic. Noise. Dreams. And somewhere inside him, doubt bloomed like smoke. What if I fail? What if I don't belong among the talented? What if I lose myself in the crowd? And worse. What if the pain returns and this time there's no one to catch me? He closed his eyes. Images returned. His mother's letter. The silent stories wall. The child who drew thunderclouds. Ms. Isha saying, just be you. And then. A whisper inside him. Not of fear, but of promise. You have something they don't, Aarav. You've lived the fire. Now light the sky. The next day, he showed the letter to Ms. Isha. She didn't smile right away. Just stared at it. Then, gently, she looked up. You're scared, she said. He nodded. She continued, you should be. Change is terrifying. But so is standing still for too long. He said nothing. She added, Aarav, you've built bridges for so many. Now it's time to cross your own. Later that week, he told his uncle. The man was silent. Then he surprised him. I won't stop you, he said. But I won't lie. I'm afraid too. Not of your success, of losing what little of your parents we have left in this house. Aarav looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, he saw not an obstacle, but a man broken differently. He walked over. Sat beside him. They'll never be gone, Aarav whispered. They're in me. I'm just carrying them forward. That night, he wrote letters. To the children at the center. To his past self. To his mother. He drew a new piece, his final gift before he left. A mountain with a torch on top. At its base, dozens of tiny figures. Children, elders, strangers. Looking up, he titled it, The Choice to Rise. On his last Sunday, the community center was packed. Kids brought handmade cards. A woman from the slum offered him a bracelet made from thread and old buttons. Even his uncle came, standing at the back, silent, but present. Ms. Isha gave him a folder. Inside, copies of every drawing he'd ever shared with the kids. Preserved. Annotated. This is your beginning, she said. Not your goodbye. He tried not to cry. Failed. At the train station, bags packed, sketchbook zipped, future uncertain. He stood alone. Then a voice called out. A small boy, one of the youngest from Silent Stories, came running. He handed Aarav a scrap of paper. On it, a crayon drawing of a boy holding a glowing heart. Underneath, the words, Bia, you gave me light. Now go and give it to the world. Aarav knelt, hugged him, held on, then stood, back straight, eyes forward. He boarded the train. Window seat. As the train pulled away, he didn't wave. He watched the station blur, watched his city shrink. And inside him, the fear remained. But now it had company. Hope. Strength. Belief. Because the choice to rise isn't about knowing what comes next. It's about choosing yourself loudly, unapologetically, despite not knowing. And so, Aarav didn't leave his pain behind. He carried it. Not as a weight, but as fuel. Every journey has a moment of stillness. Not an end. Not a pause, but a breath. A space between who you were and who you're becoming. For Aarav, that moment came beneath a gallery ceiling. 3 years had passed since he boarded that train. 3 years of learning, stumbling, growing. He had studied art not as escape, but as language. Color had become his grammar. Shapes his voice. Canvas his stage. He wasn't the top of his class, but he was the soul of it. His teachers called him the architect of feeling. Peers whispered that his work carried silence like thunder. And now he stood at his final showcase. An exhibition that would determine the fate of his first professional residency. Critics were coming. Sponsors. The press. And he had only one piece on display. Not a series. Not a portfolio. Just one canvas. Titled The Mirror Beyond the Fire. No one knew what to expect. The lights dimmed. People gathered. And then, they saw it. At first glance. A boy in a burnt room. Hands covered in ash. Eyes closed. But as they stepped closer, they saw what his eyes were seeing. Not the ruin. Not the pain. But what rose from it. A grandmother's hands holding stories. Children drawing in alleyways. A teacher placing a mirror in a boy's hands instead of a report card. A stranger offering thread and buttons in place of gold. Behind the boy stood a bridge reaching not just forward, but backward. Connecting grief to grace. Fear to expression. Loneliness to voice. And floating above him. A phoenix. Not made of flames, but of art. Sketches. Colors. Pages. Walls. Each feather a moment Aarav had once survived, now transformed into something others could feel without needing to be told. The gallery went silent. No applause. Just breath. Held. Shaken. Then slowly someone clapped. Another joined. And then the room erupted. But Aarav wasn't watching them. His eyes were on a small corner of the crowd, where two familiar figures stood. One, Ms. Isha. Gray streaking her hair now, but fire still in her smile. Beside her, his uncle. Hands in his pockets. Eyes glassy. Pride restrained but real. Later, a journalist asked him, "What message does your work carry?" He replied, simply, that we are not what hurt us. We are what we choose to do with that hurt. The article went viral. His phone rang nonstop. Gallery invitations. Fellowships. Mentorship offers. But Aarav stayed still, because something inside him had changed. He had dreamed of fame, recognition, escape. But now, he dreamed of return. So he went home, not forever, but long enough to paint a new mural at the community center. This time it showed the same boy, older now, kneeling beside children holding broken crayons. But in his hands, he wasn't drawing. He was listening, letting others create. letting others rise. He relaunched Silent Stories as a traveling exhibition. Each month it moved to a new town. New hands, new wounds, new art. And the rule was always the same. You don't need to explain your pain. You just need to name it. Children from shelters, teens from correction homes, widows, abandoned artists, survivors of abuse, they all came. They drew. They spoke. They remembered. And in remembering, they released. Years later, Aarav was invited to speak at a global youth summit. He stood on a stage in New York. Taller now? Steady. He didn't show his art. He told his story. Not for sympathy, but for resonance. He ended his speech with a simple sentence. Every fire we survive gives us light. But it's what we do with that light that defines who we are. Silence. Then applause. Later, someone from the audience approached him, a nervous teenager. She said, "I don't draw. I can't even speak to my own parents about how I feel. But hearing you made me want to try." He smiled, handed her a pencil from his pocket. "No pressure," he said. "Just start with a line." That night, in his hotel room, he opened his sketchbook. Blank page. He began drawing a flame. Not wild, not consuming. Just a gentle torch. Passed from hand to hand. No faces. Just the idea. The idea that maybe we survive so others don't have to survive alone. He titled it Legacy and closed the book, knowing finally that his story wasn't his alone anymore. It was a bridge, a mirror, a map, and somewhere, a child was picking up a crayon, ready to begin their own.